Sessions. We do these sessions once a month on various topics around leadership and how to have a better workplace. So today, in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, we thought that we would talk about toxic workplaces. So if possible, for networking purposes, if you're so inclined, please put your name, your company name, and your contact information in the chat, and we will go ahead on and get started. All right. So first of all, let me share my screen. How about that? Can you see my share? Can you see my screen? Okay. Yep. Wonderful, wonderful. All right. So did you know that the average person will spend 90,000 hours at work over a lifetime? 90,000. That's a lot of time that we're spending over in a workplace with our work family. And what that means is we have to think about how that impacts us as human beings. So again, during this Mental Health Awareness Month, we are wanting to work with leaders to make sure that we think about what it means to have a toxic workplace. So what is the impact overall of a toxic workplace? Number one, it impacts the personal well-being of each of your team members. It has an impact on team dynamics in the way of trust and communication. And it also impacts the bottom line. So it impacts the performance of the organization, which is a direct influence on the bottom line with your organization. So who are we? I am Carla Harris. Again, I'm with the People Institute, and our goal is to work with organizations from a very human approach. Our training is we empower current and future leaders. We look at things from a humanistic approach. We work with the whole person, not just the one who shows up at your doorstep every single day. We want to work with you to create an environment that promotes collaboration, communication, and to strengthen your employee engagement. And during our session for the next hour, we're going to talk about how do you define a toxic workplace? What are the signs? How do you recognize the signs and be able to really head it off at the beginning? And then the role of leaders within a workplace culture and how leaders can impact both positively or negatively around a toxic workplace. So this will be engaging. If you're on your computer or if you're on your phone, if you can log in or text, log into this website right here, poll.ev, you can click right on the screen and it should take you there. Or if you have your phone, you can text Carla Harris 989 to 37607. And as we get closer to the end of our session, there will be a discussion that we'll all have, and I would love for you to participate. All right. So first of all, what is a toxic workplace? So a toxic workplace, by definition, is a culture that's generally characterized by behaviors, practices, and attitudes that create a negative or harmful work environment for employees. This can include a range of behaviors such as bullying, harassment, discrimination, micromanagement, a lack of transparency from leaders and middle managers. It can have an impact on how we feel supported in our workplace, whether or not our team members feel undervalued or even threatened in some instances. So when we think about what the impact is on our mental health, it also impacts our physical health when we work in those toxic work environments. So what is the impact? First of all, the impact is employee well-being, right? Toxic behaviors can create a stressful and unhealthy work environment that can lead to a negative impact on our mental health and our physical health. It can include stress, anxiety, depression, burnout. I mean, all of these things, remember, we're talking about the 90,000 hours that we spend over a lifetime. If we work in a work environment that's not conducive to growth and development and not conducive to our own psychological safety, then we are really impacting our physical bodies. And when we impact our physical bodies, we're impacting our health and our families and those around us. So as I like to say, we never bring only a part of us to work. We bring all of us to work. So how do we learn to compartmentalize those pieces when we're in a work environment that's not necessarily the healthiest place for us to be? It also impacts our team dynamics. So toxic behaviors can erode trust and communication along with collaboration between teams. When people don't feel safe, they don't feel very collaborative in working with others. And we want to make sure that we're not creating these feelings of isolation or exclusion, which can further perpetuate the feeling of toxicity. There's also organizational performance. The financial and reputations cost a lot for our organizations to continue working in this environment. High rates of turnover, absenteeism. We are making sure that if we're focusing on the development and well-being of our teams, we're also focusing on the development and well-being of our bottom line. So when we talk about organizational performance, we have to be able to really take a look at what the culture is within the organization, because having a positive culture within the organization helps retain customers and also helps us attract and retain really strong talent. And that's really, really important. And then finally, we talk about the legal and ethical implications. Toxic work behaviors such as harassment, discrimination, retaliation, they can all have a legal or ethical implication for the organization. And as leaders, a failure to address these can lead to legal action and negative publicity. And we absolutely do not want that for our organizations. Excuse me. So what are some of the examples? We talked about, we've talked about what the impact can be, but what are some of those examples of behavior? So we're talking about bullying, harassment, micromanagement, a lack of transparency, showing favoritism for one employee over another for various reasons. It doesn't really matter what the reason is, but when one team member feels as if they're chosen or not chosen because of a relationship within the work environment, then that's where we have favoritism coming in. Disrespect is also a key. How are we respecting one another? And what does that look like? Micromanagement, excessive control or monitoring of employees, and setting unrealistic expectations. So these are all examples and just the beginning of examples of what a toxic behavior environment looks like. So what is the psychological toll? We talked about the psychological toll on, let me just pull them up here, on a toxic behavior. So one, stress and anxiety. Experiencing stress such as bullying, harassment, micromanagement can put a person's mental state in a constant state of stress and anxiety, leading to negative impacts on mental health and well-being, depression and burnout. And that's a chronic exposure to toxic behaviors leading to feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, disengagement, which can result in depression and burnout. And you think about it, when we look at an engaged organization, engaged employees, we have actively engaged, we have disengaged, and then we have actively disengaged. So that middle road, disengaged, really is a person who's there just because they have to be there. And when we have a workplace that's not healthy, then we have to make sure that we're addressing those issues one-to-one with each of our team members. Low self-esteem and confidence is impacted. These are the psychological tolls that it has. Experiencing toxic behavior such as disrespect or favoritism can undermine an employee's self-esteem and confidence, leading to a feeling of inadequacy or self-doubt. When we think about that, and if you take a mental look around your staff, you can begin to see if there is a toxic environment. You can begin to see withdrawal. You can see people who used to be a part of the culture and now they just stay at their desk. They have lunch alone. They physically take themselves away from the overall culture of the organization, which leads us to isolation and disconnection. And then finally, the big one is PTSD. We've all heard about PTSD from major traumatic experiences in people's lives. But when you are involved in an ongoing case of toxic work behavior, it can have a long-term impact on your health and well-being. And you can be diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress syndrome, and you want to make sure that these are addressed. So how are we what is the impact a little deeper on team dynamics? So lack of trust, poor communication, a lack of collaboration, and reduced motivation. Let's start with reduced motivation. So reduced motivation is, or motivation in general, is an area that many people think, money is a great motivator, or flexible schedule is a great motivator. But when you're in a toxic work environment, it's so draining on who you are as an individual. And you want to make sure that people have the ability to be their authentic selves within the workplace. So when we talk about reducing motivation, people are disengaged and they're not wanting to be there. So if you have someone that's actively disengaged, not only do they not want to be there, they're talking about why it's such an awful place to work for. And that then begins breeding the cancer that's within the organization, which ultimately impacts your bottom line. And it impacts your bottom line because there is a decreased innovation and creativity, which means you're not bringing your full self to what the services are that you're providing to your clients. It is a decrease in customer satisfaction and customer loyalty. So the mistake is often made that what's happening internally with the organization is not impacting the external services. And that couldn't be farther from the truth, because ultimately the people that are impacted by the internal goings on in an organization, they present it even subconsciously when they're working with clients. There's body language, there's a feeling of detachment. So all of that is impacting your end user, your client's experience, which is of course impacting your bottom line. Increased absenteeism and turnover. So your people are coming and going, they're not staying. And as we all know as leaders, it's much, much more expensive to bring on new folks than it is to just train and engage and invest in a current staffing that you have. And of course, reduce productivity and efficiency. So I think I want to stop my share for a moment and ask you some questions. What experience have you had in your organization or in other organizations about or with a toxic workplace environment? And what have you seen that impact? How has it impacted yourself? How has it impacted your teams? So just share with us a little bit. Just unmute yourself and share with us a little bit. Anyone want to get started? Let's see, I will call on you. Vanessa.
I was gonna say, I guess things like just a lot of negativity, like negative talk about maybe other staff or the organization. I think is the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Suzanne?
I worked for an organization where the toxicity started at the top with the behavior of the CEO. And so she set the tone throughout the organization where it became dysfunctional in terms of teamwork, productivity. So leadership plays a huge role in terms of how their organization employees engage with one another, trust one another, and collaborate with one another.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head. The culture begins at the top. Culture development within an organization. If you don't have great, strong buy-in from your leadership, then you cannot change a culture, because that's the role that leadership is playing. And what they're saying, even silently, is that behavior is absolutely okay.
And I will say that I tried my best to navigate through the landmines within that organization and trying to still be successful in that toxic culture. But it got to the point where I had to think more for myself and my well-being and my career, and decide to disengage and find a new position. There was no way that culture could change with leadership not willing to change.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyone else? Marty, you shaking your head there. Any comments?
Yes, I remember quite a few years ago, I worked for a company where every morning I had to pass by a VP's office and I felt like I was walking on eggshells because I was hoping she wasn't there. And I didn't report to her directly, I indirectly reported to her, but I felt like I was walking on eggshells every day. So it was a very stressful environment. And I think to tap onto what Suzanne said is that it starts with the top. And the leadership that I was dealing with this particular company at the time it was almost like 2 or 3 different levels of leadership. And one was like the boys club. The other was, a group of people that were trying to become in the boys club or as part of leaders. And so nobody really, I think to Suzanne's point, really said this is the wrong way of getting our leaders to act. And even my chief marketing officer at the time, he was my direct report. I directly reported to him. And this VP would try to, put me down for the work that I was doing. Thankfully, I had all of the data to show that I was doing exactly what I needed to do. And I kind of was like, it was like drop the mic, in that instance. But if nobody's recognizing it, acknowledging it, and then saying, even if you have a side conversation with somebody, right, a leader to a leader saying, hey, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but I can see where your behavior, your attitude, your personality might come off in a wrong way to certain people. And I think at that time, people just didn't know how to talk to each other. And, and we don't know our behaviors unless somebody brings it to our attention. So I do feel like at that time, now, hopefully that organization has become better, but you got to acknowledge it and accept that, okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong. And I definitely know at that time that this particular VP did not want to hear it. She didn't want to accept her behavior and understand that, like, I didn't need to be walking in every morning, hoping that I'd walk by her office and she wasn't there yet, just so I could get there and feel like, oh my God. So that toxicity can definitely, and like you said, Carla, before, it can impact our state of being, our well-being, and our physical being. So the ability, I think, for people just to recognize that, hey, I might not be the best, and I welcome people's remarks, because if you don't know what you're doing wrong, you can't correct it and hopefully change, the workplace for the better.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So how do we recognize the signs? So when we think about what the signs are, let's take a look at what some of those areas look like. So when we talk about bullying or harassment, So that's any kind of behavior that is abusive, intimidating, or offensive. And it can be any of the above: verbal, it can be physical, it can be psychological. And those are areas that we have to take a look at and make sure that we are attuned to what's going on and listen for what's happening in the departments around us and with your team. Micromanaging, excessive control and supervision of employees. So this is not allowing your team members to have any level of autonomy. And what does that do? I mean, imagine if you said to yourself, every time you did something, your supervisor or your leader or someone within your sphere of work always said, is it done? Have you done it? When's it coming? Those are areas that lead to a level of disempowerment, frustration. There's a lack of trust, and it's just not a healthy work environment to work in. Gossiping or spreading rumors. So this is intentionally creating a negative or divisive workplace culture. And we all know what happens when people only get part of the story. So we want to make sure that we're listening for that and not encouraging it and not participating in it. Sometimes we can participate in gossip without really meaning to. And that's just by giving a listening ear to the person who's talking out of turn. Undermining or sabotaging. So this is intentionally damaging or interfering with the work or reputation of someone else. So these are behaviors that you want to watch in meetings. If you see that Bob is making a presentation, but then the comments after that all say, well, this is what I did, or this is how I helped. Those are all intentional areas of damaging or interfering with whoever is making the presentation. And that's where you have to be careful and learn to nip it in the bud almost immediately. You don't want to do it in front of others, but you definitely want to address it in a one-on-one coaching session. A lack of accountability. So this is folks failing to take responsibility for their own actions, blaming others for the mistakes, avoiding consequences. Those are areas that you also have to listen out for. If something happens and you know that it came from a particular person's work, then and that person says, nope, I didn't do it, I wasn't here, or I was waiting for so-and-so to do their part. That is your lack of accountability. Discrimination or bias. And of course, we all know what that is, right? Unfairly treating people based on their race, gender, age, religion, or any other personal characteristics that separate them from you or them from the person that is talking about it. And then finally, withholding information or resources. And this is intentionally withholding information or opportunities from colleagues or subordinates, which can create a culture of secrecy. And as you mentioned, Marty, kind of that old boys club. We have to make sure that we're dealing with one another very open and very from a very transparent perspective. So what do you want to look for? You want to look for emotions and reactions, patterns, and red flags. So when we talk about emotions and reactions, we're looking at it from two sides. One, you want to look at your own emotions and take a personal inventory about what your reactions are so that we don't engage unnecessarily. And toxic behaviors can trigger a negative emotion in us, even if it doesn't happen to us. It can create, just being on the sidelines and seeing it can create a stirring, if you will, of memories that bring up anger, bring up fear, bring up frustration. So when you think about the relationships that you had in the workplace in the past, and you begin seeing even a snippet of what that relationship could be in a current situation, then all of a sudden you feel yourself tensing up. And you want to make sure that you have a great self-awareness so that you're not falling in to those old patterns. And then when we talk about patterns, you want to look at certain behaviors or situations that consistently create tension, conflict. It could be a sign of toxic behavior. It could be always the person flying off the handle. It could be like what you mentioned, not wanting to greet someone at the door because you don't know what person you're going to get when they walk through the door. And you have to make sure that when we're aware of those things, one, control yourself and your own emotions, but figure out a communication way of engaging with that person in the best way possible. And then finally, when you look at red flags, look out for behaviors such as constant criticism, bullying, whether it's a small or large. It could be micromanaging, microaggressions, discrimination. These are often the beginnings of a red flag situation, and you should stop it as leaders. You have to stop it when you see it. There should be a zero tolerance policy that you have within your organization, that you have even within your own authenticity. Just make sure that internally you have a zero tolerance policy for any of those things. And then what are some of the intervention and prevention strategies that you can do? First, identify the behavior. That's pretty simple, right? Be clear on what a toxic behavior looks like in your organization. So if you have a policy around harassment, identify what some of those things are in a written format, in a written policy. So people have no question about what's acceptable within your organization and what is not. Document the behavior. So here in Florida, we're an at-will work state. People can leave, you can terminate folks without any notice. And we know that that's really not the best way to do it. But the best way is to begin documenting the behavior. Keep a record of specific incidents or examples of the behavior. And then this will be helpful when it comes to review time or coaching. Those things are really, really important. Oops, sorry about that. Address the behavior directly. And if you feel comfortable, talk to the person with, one-to-one. If you don't feel comfortable, then bring in a manager, another colleague, bring in HR, bring in those folks that can help you address the situation. And then when you address the situation, make sure that you're clear, you're specific, write it down. You want to be non-confrontational in your own approach. And you also want to focus on the behavior rather than the person. So talking about the behavior that they're exhibiting rather than saying you always think about, I don't like this behavior versus you are doing such and such. Because then when you use the behavior approach, then it's a little bit less personal than when you say you becomes much more accusatory. Of course, you want to seek support if you need to. If this is a formal reprimand, then you definitely want to create a plan for improvement. You want to identify training that they can go to, coaching that they can get, and make sure that there's also a follow-up policy as it relates to what their plan should include. And then finally, address any systemic issues. So Suzanne talked about it a little bit with leadership. If leadership is not setting the right role for addressing this issue or what the culture should be, that's a systemic issue. That's an issue that is going to filter down no matter what. So even if you're a department leader and you have the greatest intentions, if upper management is not supporting that kind of behavior, then it's really what you're doing from a positive perspective is really going to be falling on deaf ears. So I want you to pull out your phones and your text messaging. And the question is, how can leaders, specifically, how can leaders create a culture that actively prevents a toxic behavior? Good, so we have some people that are ahead of the class. Great. Listening, employees, volume. Interesting. Who said volume? And what did you mean by that? Can you unmute yourself and tell us what you meant by volume?
Hi, this is Callie. Something that I've been practicing on is making sure that the volume and tone of my voice is calm, reassuring. It's really critical on how you present yourself to the team to kind of give reassurance, especially in maybe heated moments. And if you can maintain a really calm composure, especially with your voice and volume, it kind of shows that you're giving everyone room to express themselves, but still understand that we're not going to lose our cool, you know, just because maybe there's some disagreeing going on or maybe toxic behavior going on between employees. So volume and tone is very critical, I believe, when it comes.
Excellent. I agree. Thank you for elaborating on that.
Yeah.
So we have behavior, we have example. Someone here says keep, and I think that might be along with the volume. And then we have model. So this is modeling the behavior that you want, being positive, leading. So people want to be led, not managed. So having a focus on real leadership development is really what's important. You want to make sure that we are looking at people again as the authentic whole person that's coming to the table. So in the chat, I've changed the chat. So now you're only chatting with me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how healthy is your workplace? 1, not healthy at all. 10, super healthy with no issues at all. So this is a private chat. It's coming to me. You're not at all talking about your organization publicly, but it's always good to just, recognize what state of culture you're currently working in. So 1 is not healthy at all. And 10 is super healthy with no issues. If you could just pop that in the chat, I would really appreciate it. All right. So now, what's leadership got to do with it? We know that leadership has a lot to do with it. There's your role as a leader, and then there are the skills needed as a leader. So first and foremost, as a leader, you want to check your behavior. Make sure that you are absolutely putting out what you want to get back. And when you do that, you're going to begin being the role model that you want to see. And you want to lead with a level of respect and collaboration. Always, always, always respect the people you're working with, who you're talking to. You want to always have an air of collaboration. It's funny, I just did a post for Mother's Day, and I created these Juneisms. My mom's name was June, and one of her favorite things that she would say to us is you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. And when you take a stance of kindness and working with people, you will absolutely get more people on the bandwagon than you would if you're shouting and berating people. So always consider that. You want to lead with a level of respect and an air of collaboration. Create policies and procedures that promote a healthy workspace. So this is where your real policies come in. We talked about a few minutes ago, making sure you have your toxic behaviors that are unacceptable outlined, But if you look at it from a positive perspective, think about writing and putting in your policy what your goals are that promote a healthy work balance. You have to make sure that people are invited into a workplace that is filled with camaraderie and collaboration and team building, because that's where people can thrive. And you want people to thrive, because when your people thrive, your consumers thrive. And ultimately, that's really where you need to be. And then as leaders, have a zero tolerance policy for toxic behavior. Make sure that people know it is absolutely not acceptable to have any kind of harassment, bullying, micromanaging, any of that in your workplace. And then, of course, the skills needed to support the role as leader is communication, is emotional intelligence, which is just desperately missing in a lot of workplaces that we're working with, integrity, empowerment, having an air of inclusivity and belonging, and then continually learning and growing in your own abilities as a leader, and making sure that your team is learning and growing as well. And then what happens when you put all of this in place and now people are challenging you, or they're resisting the push, they're giving you pushback. So some of the instances of where you can see there's challenge and resistance is a denial or lack of awareness. Some individuals may simply not be aware of the behaviors that they're putting off. They don't know the impact of their tone, their communication styles, their leadership styles that they would have on those people that they're leading. So you have to make sure that initially that people are made aware of it. And you do that through education and communication. You give concrete examples about why that behavior is having a negative impact on another person or the team as a whole. And then encourage open dialogue and have create opportunities for employees to share their experiences. We do that through something called Brave Conversations. So our Brave Conversations started around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we've since broadened it when we're working with clients to make sure that their team has an opportunity to talk about those difficult conversations in a forum that's safe and facilitated. So having this in a toxic work environment is very, very beneficial. Fear of retaliation. So the person who is the bully, they're the ones who are thinking that if they bring it to leadership's attention, then there's going to be a level of retaliation. So what needs to happen is, as leaders, you have to create a safe and confidential reporting system, number one, where they can really have an opportunity to share their concerns and to share their experiences. And then they need to be taken seriously and they need to be addressed immediately. So we can't just have the mechanism in place without really having the action in place to follow up with it. There's also a resistance from the perpetrator. So resistance from the person who is the bully, who is the harasser. They're absolutely denying that they're doing it, and there's a resistance to change. And how do we do that? We have to engage in one-on-one conversations with these individuals so that they can understand why their behavior is not acceptable, but also to understand where that behavior comes from. So when we think about, again, bringing the whole person to work, there are all those perspectives that we bring from our life experiences. So when we think about that, perhaps someone was dealt with that way at their previous employer. So now they're thinking that that's what they have to do, excuse me, in order to be successful. So understanding the whole perspective is really, really important. And then finally, persistence and reinforcement. Make sure you write it down. Make sure that you are consistently offering the same kind of coaching, the same kind of outcome, no matter who does it, because you really don't want your perception to be that you deal with one person one way and another person another way. And then make a commitment as a leader, make a commitment to yourself, make a commitment to your team that this is absolutely the best place to work. This is the best place. You are the greatest leader and you're developing great leaders. And that's how you're able to see the signs of a toxic work environment, work to change those, and to understand your role as a leader in creating a workplace that is absolutely positively a healthy way and a healthy organization for people to work in. So I would love to talk with you about your goals. Here, you can schedule right with us. You can just click that QR code or take a picture of it and really talk to you about what your goals are and how you can increase and strengthen the team within your organization. I'm so excited that you're here. As I mentioned, we have this once a month. So our June 15 session is on customer service for both internal and external customers. And now I would love to, in our last few minutes, open it up for questions or comments. Any ways that you have been able to, overcome a toxic work environment. Shelley?
Well, I have a question that
Sure.
probably I'm not the only one who comes across this. So, 90% of our job comes down to it with staff that it's a he said, she said thing. We weren't there when it happened, but I have one who probably falls under 3 of the categories: lack of accountability, bullying, borderline harassment. And every time it's addressed, it's not me, somebody else. I didn't do that. That's not what I said. So, you hear it from everybody that this is happening. And it happens to every new employee who walks through the door. But every discussion is not me. Let me tell you what happened. Never me. It was the other person. Other than telling them what my expectations is, any suggestions how you get around that? Because it becomes a he said, she said.
Well, first of all, if you're finding that this is a repeated offense with the same person, then now is the time to document. That's
Right.
number one. Number two, if multiple people are having the same complaint, then there is some absolute validity to what's going on. I would look at putting some training or coaching in place.
Okay.
I would look at doing some self-awareness or some EI training and surveys so that they can begin assessing themselves objectively. And many times it's hard to hear objectively with people that you're working with.
Right.
So I would encourage you to look at someone who can give you an outside perspective. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Arlene?
Sorry, I was trying to eat lunch and I apologize, but it made me think about, Carla, how we all were in school back in the day and our teachers would call our parents and said, our name was acting up in class. And I would say, that teacher is lying.
Yes.
And then, of course, I had kids. And same thing, teacher would call, my son was acting up in class. My son said, that teacher is not telling the truth. I said, so everyone is lying on you?
Mhm.
So going back to what the previous was said, everybody
Shelley.
is lying on this person.
Yeah.
Everyone is lying on this person. So you definitely want to make sure you document and excuse me, when you do meet with that person, to let them know that you are seeing a pattern. That
Okay.
this is not just one person, but again, the documentation helps And sometimes, again, if the person is willing to have, in a session with you and that other person in the room, because I've done some intermission, where I had both parties in the room. And we had a
Yeah.
discussion, open dialogue, and sometimes, for the most part, it worked.
Right.
Because I'm not the mediator, or, well, one person told me one thing and another person is saying everything, something totally different. I want to bring both of you guys in here and we can all talk about it and hopefully we can come up with a solution.
Right.
That's what I
Yeah,
wanted to add.
excellent, excellent. Anyone else? Any other questions? Thank you both. Any other questions, comments? Well, again, to respect your time, we're at 1:51. Our session was from 1 to 2. I again would look forward to working with each of you and your firms, and hopefully we'll see you in June when we're talking about customer service. So until next time, have a great day. Enjoy your holiday.
Bye,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Hmm.